Chapter 20. Doctor becomes unpopular. Oh, Ranzo was no sailor, Ranzo boys, Ranzo. Oh, Ranzo was a tailor, Ranzo boys, Ranzo. Halyard Shanty. A solemn group of men stood before the heap of sails, the captain, the three mates, the doctor, half a dozen sailors, and Lino Morales, the Mexican boss. Tell your men, Lino, Captain Hagestrom was saying in a tense, repressed voice, that from now on, my watchmen will shoot first and ask questions afterward when any man is seen tampering with the vessel's gear. But, Captain, the Mexican protested, how do you know my men cut the sails? They are not angels, my men, but there are others. I don't know, the captain interrupted, but I am taking no chances. See that the men understand my orders. Yes, Captain. Mr. Jensen, the captain turned to face the chief mate. Spread out the sail and see how badly they're damaged. With that, he turned and disappeared into the cabin. Bert joined the men who carried the cut sails a few yards forward and spread them out, one on top of the other, across the width of the vessel, over the after hatch and deck load on either side. The first, a lower top gallant sail, was cut across 5 seams with a dozen smaller crisscross slashes, hardly worth repairing. The next, an upper topsail, had a few short cuts only. A couple of hours' work with the palm and needle would make it good as ever. But another topsail was gashed beyond repair, as was a lower topsail. 3 more sails could be repaired, while the rest, lying underneath, were undamaged. Bert breathed a sigh of relief. What were 3 sails? A matter of a few $100s, as long as they still had enough canvas to reach their destination. The devil must have been scared off before he finished, commented the third. Poker Gus surveyed the damage in silence, while the doctor stood at his elbow, asking if the sails could be patched. Oh, yes, the second assured him. A few hours' delay, that is all. Acting on a sudden impulse, Bert stepped up to the 2 men and asked innocently, jerking his thumb toward the sails, "Who do you suppose would have done a thing like that?" Both of them glowered at him. If you ask me, young man, I should say that some man with a cold was trying to snip out some handkerchiefs, the doctor sneered. Or perhaps, Bert returned sweetly, some man with a secret was trying to snip out some gags. Bert saw the second's face twitch. The doctor looked just like a storm cloud about to burst. He choked and sputtered just then. From a few steps aft came the furious clang of a bell announcing breakfast in the officers' mess. Poker Gus took the doctor by the arm. "Let's eat," he said, and together they moved away, chortling with glee. Bert watched them go. In a moment, another bell summoned him forward to his own breakfast. That day, Nick Previson, with 3 others to help him, was detailed to work at his old trade of sail-making. By nightfall, they had repaired all the damaged sails except the 3 that were slashed beyond redemption, with neat, strong patches. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew hauled the sound sails aloft and bent them on, and afterward the patched sails, as Nick and his helpers finished them, so that when the men quit work to wash up for the evening meal, there remained but 2 sails to be bent on. "We sail at 2 bells of the forenoon watch," the chief mate announced to the crew's mess. "We'll bend on those other 2 sails after we get to sea." There was a murmur of approval from the mess. Good, no use wasting any more time. 9 o'clock sailing time would give them a chance to eat breakfast in peace before starting the work of casting off lines and making sail after the short tow out of the harbor. So one more island night descended on the little harbor, and the restive Queen of Asia. This time, 2 watchmen with rifles over their shoulders patrolled the decks all through the night and until the crew had finished breakfast the next morning. The only disturbance during the night, they said, had been an attempted break for shore by that big nigger, Johnson. But the watchman had seen him clambering over the bulwarks. "The big coon ought to have known we'd spot him easy under the floodlights," one of them said. The watchman had called to the policeman on the pier. The policeman had marched the culprit up the gangplank, and the watchman had escorted him into the 'tween decks at the muzzles of their rifles with a promise to shoot if he appeared on deck again before morning. Bert listened to the account of the incident with some mental reservations. When he left the mess after breakfast, he found Big Boy Johnson leaning indolently against the bulwarks. The Negro greeted him with a smiling display of white teeth. "Morning, boss," he said. "Did y'all hear about my attempted escapade last night?" "Yes, I heard about it," the boy answered. "Where's the joker? You weren't trying to escape, big boy." "Me escape? Shucks no, boss. I was just distracting a little attention." Suddenly suspicious, Bert demanded, "Where's Bill Billings?" The Negro's broad smile flashed again. "Who? That no-count white boy? I couldn't just say where he is, but I's under the depression that he went for a swim last night and ain't got back yet." Bert mused. "So that's why you made a fuss under the floodlights." "Yes, sir. That's why." Bert walked away thoughtfully. Bill Billings was a quitter. Well, he didn't know that he blamed him. Perhaps he'd quit too if he found himself in the other boy's shoes. At 10 minutes of 9, just as the tug was making fast alongside the bark, the doctor strolled leisurely up the gangplank while 4 seamen waited for him to cross before hauling the plank aboard. What had he been doing ashore just before sailing time? Perhaps sending another cablegram to number 14 Spofford Alley, the boy thought. At 5 minutes of 9, all was in readiness. No use in waiting. Captain Hagestrom, standing at the break of the poop by the rail next the pier, cupped his hands over his mouth to give the command that would free the vessel of the slender lines that bound her to the shore and make her once more a living, purposeful thing. From where he stood on the main deck, a few feet below, Bert saw the skipper draw in his breath to give his command volume enough to carry to the chief mate on the forecastle head. Then the skipper seemed to catch sight of something that made him pause. He lowered his hands a few inches and waited. Bert followed his gaze to an approaching launch. It had a familiar look, that launch. It rounded to under the bark's counter. There was a Kanaka at the wheel. A man in a perfectly tailored khaki uniform of military cut stood in the cockpit, looking up at the waiting master of the Queen of Asia. Bert felt as though his heart had skipped a beat. The port doctor. "I'm very sorry to have to delay you, Captain, but Dr. Hydes, your ship's doctor, has just telephoned to report a case of smallpox on board. You are under quarantine. Move your vessel around to the quarantine wharf at once." The port doctor spoke to the Kanaka, and the launch darted out into the harbor again. Stunned by the terrible announcement, Bert looked up at Captain Hagestrom. Surely Captain Hagestrom would not allow this delay. He would do something. The skipper's face looked as though he had been struck with a mailed fist. In a few seconds, it was white with anger. Bert felt a flush of hope, which died almost instantly. The captain could do nothing, for in port a captain is no longer master of his vessel, except in name. He must take orders from owners or port officials like a common sailor. "Where is that doctor?" The captain's voice was low and menacing. "Right here, Captain." Bert started. Even from his vantage point, he had not seen the doctor standing on the poop a few feet back of the captain. The captain wheeled on him viciously. Bert was thankful that it was the doctor and not Seaman 28 who faced the bark skipper at that moment. For an instant he thought that Captain Hagestrom would thrash the man on the spot, but the captain checked himself, and when he spoke his voice was a note or two below a conversational tone, so low that the listening boy could scarcely hear. His voice was low, but every word writhed and spit like a venomous snake. "What in blazes do you think you're doing, you blear-eyed scoundrel?" Ignoring the insult, the doctor answered in conciliatory tones. "But, Captain," he said, "it is the law. I only did my duty in reporting the case. It is a Negro in the 'tweendecks. Your duty be hanged. It was your duty to report to me at your first suspicion that there was smallpox on board. When did you discover the case?" "Only this morning, Captain. The rash hasn't broken out yet, but the man has all the symptoms. Headache, eyes puffy, nauseated at times, and feeling generally rotten. Of course, no one can be certain until the rash breaks out at the end of the 3rd day. Surely a little delay—" "You and your symptoms be damned. If I can prove," the captain said slowly, "that you have reported an imaginary case merely to delay our passage, I'll put you in irons and send you—" "Captain! Hey, Captain Tom!" Bert jumped at the familiar voice of Nick Previson shouting almost in his ear. Nick put a hand on the boy's shoulder to steady himself. Bert tried in vain to silence him. "Shay, Cap'n," Nick said loudly, "if you want that black cockroach pulled apart without getting your hands dirty, just send him down to me. Nick Previson'll dissect him for you." Captain Hagestrom looked down from the poop. Bert thought that his face softened a trifle. "Get forward and sober up, Nick," he said. "You're a sailor, not a vivisectionist." Bert led Nick forward, steadying him when they had to walk over the naked piles. "What's that he called me? Vivisectionist? 'Sall right if Captain Tom says I am. 9 years I've sailed with Captain Tom." An hour later, the Queen of Asia lay at the quarantine wharf on the east side of the harbor. Down into the 'tween decks went the port doctor, accompanied by the captain and the ship's doctor. Like Jean Valjean entering the Paris sewers, Bert thought. But no, that was a little too hard on the 'tween-deckers. They weren't all human sewage, and certainly it wasn't entirely their fault if they were. Barnacles, Fred von Bergen had called them, barnacles that ought to be scraped off the hull of civilization. But even the German had called them civilization's misfits. Then, was it their fault, or civilization's? Was it the fault of the nut, or the bolt that the two didn't fit? He would have to talk it over with the German again. Meanwhile, something important was going on down below. Bert would have given a good deal to know what, as would the 25 or 30 members of the crew who waited with him in the space between the mizzenmast and the midship deckhouse for the reappearance of the three. The crew was impatient, restless, and angry. This floating warehouse had a jinx, if ever ship had one. Jinx be hanged. It was that doctor, a rotten deal any way you looked at it. That's what you got for signing on with a cheap outfit. No use going north now. Might as well head back for Frisco. At last, the port doctor stepped out of the after-deck house, followed a second later by Captain Hagestrom and Dr. Hayes. An instant hush fell over the seamen. 3 days should tell the story, the port doctor was saying. Some sort of rash will probably develop within that time. "And if it is smallpox?" inquired the captain. "The usual time, 12 days. If there are more cases, it will be 12 days after the last case develops. But," he added, "it may be chickenpox. But my God, doctor, the loss of 2 weeks now means ruin for my company and a wasted season for all these fishermen. Many of them have families dependent on what they can earn." The port doctor shrugged. "I repeat, Captain, that I am very sorry, but I did not make the law. Neither did I endow your doctor with his phenomenal ability to diagnose smallpox." On the gangplank, the doctor paused. "You understand, of course, that no one may go ashore." The captain nodded, turned away, and climbed to the poop. Bert felt a surge of pity for him. He looked suddenly old and beaten, and nothing that had happened had been his fault. The storm, the loss of sails, the delay of running to Honolulu, and now quarantine for smallpox. They wouldn't have been quarantined if they hadn't run to Honolulu. They wouldn't have run to Honolulu if the sails hadn't blown out. The sails wouldn't have blown out if they had been sound. The sails would have been sound if the company... He had to stop. That line of reasoning pointed inevitably to conclusions that he couldn't face. Not yet, anyway. The men about him were talking again, this time in angry, threatening tones. "We're to lose the season because that skunk of a doctor finds a nigger with a bellyache, are we? Let's string the yellow dog up to the main yard. Better we cut quick his throat. Ask Doc if he's sold all his dope and has to wait here for a new supply." The last remark was shouted, evidently in the hope that it would carry into the cabin aft. In this murderous mood, the Queen of Asia's crew faced the 3-day wait. If they start this way, Bert thought, how will they end?